I'm going to tell you about why Python is good for computational neuroscience. So, who knows what computational neuroscience is? Oh, we've got one person, so I think I'll need to explain a little bit. So, it's some sort of brain research. So, maybe brain research is easier to pronounce, but it's a bit too vague. So, computational neuroscience, I'm going to talk more about some specific flavor of brain research. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm going to talk more about specific flavor of brain research that studies how the mind emerges from the meat. So, a quick recap. The brain is made of neurons. They are organized into areas. I'm going to call them maps or areas. They are connected together within areas, and the areas of the brain are also connecting between themselves in a relatively structured manner. Thank you. In a relatively structured manner. These remote areas and the local areas are processing information. So some of the maps of neurons are receiving inputs from your senses. Some of the maps are not, but are receiving either inputs from other maps of neurons, and some specialized structures are outputting commands to your motor system. So it's quite complex. The orbital question that we are trying to answer from the very high point of view, it's how does the mind as experienced by our subjective self arise from the interaction of these neurons, or if you prefer, from an objective point of view, how does your behavior arises from these interactions? So there have been, of course, people already studying the mind since ancient times, like philosophers and psychologists, and there have also been people studying neurons and the biological networks since almost as long. Of course, it was more difficult before the microscope was invented. But the issue that I'm going to talk about, it lies in between, because there is a gap in our understanding in our knowledge of how neurons in our knowledge of neurons and maps, and in our understanding of how it makes the mind. We don't understand how neurons give rise to cognition. So the discipline the discipline that deals with that is called cognitive neuroscience. It tries to bridge this gap between abstract concepts like emotions and memory and maps of neurons and descriptions. So descriptions from the neural sciences, so description of how neurons work individually, how they interact together, through their dynamics. So we have experimental data from psychologists, and does it work? Yeah, and descriptions, hopefully detailed descriptions of the neurons and descriptions of the networks of neurons. So how do we make the link between this description of the behavior and the description of neurons? Yeah, so surprise, computers, of course. So I said that we have neural networks. Those of you who attended university courses maybe had courses in artificial neural networks. Maybe you remember the pain of backpropagation network, support vector machines, or your algebra that you had to use to answer your exam questions in the artificial neural network. So it's kind of similar. So I'm sorry to remind you painful experiences if you had this, but yeah, so it's so maybe finally it's not that difficult. Maybe it's easy to understand how these networks in our brain let us have dreams and emotions. maybe we just need to make cognitive neuroscience more computational. All we need maybe is to model clinical data using these artificial neural networks, and the problem is solved. Using Python, of course. So, yeah, unfortunately, no, it's not solved. Otherwise, I would not be here. I would be busy backing up my brain scan on Dropbox or something like that. So it's not solved because the brain first is really massive. It's like 100 billion neurons, 100 trillion synapses, numbers like that. So, and second, it's a multidisciplinary exercise. So it's like long words, which it's like trying to make 12 different species of monkeys collaborate on collecting bananas. So of course you end up with poo flinging all around. Not really, it's not very collaborative. It has to be multidisciplinary because simulation alone, it will not explain how the brain works. It will never prove anything. Simulation is here to support the work of those who directly observe the brain and the behavior. So it's here to support experimentalists. Also, why we are not done yet? Well, that's because, of course, the software isn't here yet. It doesn't work. It's overdue, or rather, a lot of software is here, and researchers are working hard on it, but the scale of the problem and the scale of the issue of brain modeling in general is much larger than we can imagine. So Python can help, but to understand how and why it can help, I'll show you some of the current programs that are used that are not in Python. So it's not that they are bad, mind you. These programs, they don't have, some of them, they will never have an equivalent in Python, but that kind of isolates them. And also, you should keep in mind that what I'm going to show you, I'm really focusing on a very limited sample of a small subset of programs which are used to model the brain, model neurons and networks at a specific scale and maybe like between 2 and 1 million neurons. No, I'm talking about full brain simulations and things like that. Also I'm talking about computational cognitive neuroscience here, not about neuroscience, not about experimental psychology, not about many neuropsychology or related disciplines. And these ones, they also use Python, but differently, and they have their own and they are involved, of course, in computational neuroscience. They are involved in the prooflinging, but they don't. But I'm not going to talk about their software. So I'm going to talk about my experience. My first experience of computational neuroscience was with Emergent. So Emergent is it's a successor of a well-known and old software called PDP++. It uses point neurons, so not 3D models of neurons, but just a clever set of equations that model the behavior of neurons, mathematically model the information processing capabilities of neurons and the electrical behavior somehow. It tries to replicate some of the biological parameters somehow, but of course it's just a point. Well, the neuron is very complex. It's in 3D and everything, and it's a model, so it can be useful if you want such simplifications as the one that are brought by these equations. Or it may not be. So depending on what you are trying to examine, you may want or may not want such simple models of neurons. So this program is excellent to explore the basic principles of computational neuroscience, because it's actually the companion program of a book called Computational Explorations in Cognitive Neuroscience. And I really advise it to you if you want to start in the domain and understand some of the basic algorithms and concepts. There is a new edition due soon, and you can even download the beta of the book on their wiki, something like that.
What was its name again?
The book is Computational Explorations in Cognitive Neuroscience, CECN. It's from the Colorado University. I think it's easier to just Google Emergent neural simulation, and then you'll find the websites for everything. So there are some issues though to do research with Emergent. First, it's monolithic. It makes it harder to write your own neural models, for instance, if you want to change. Second, scripting is done in an interesting way. For want of a better word, it's using a language called C superscript. It's quite confusing because it's CSS. Nothing to do with cascading style sheets, but it's okay. I'll pass you on the detail, except one that's quite revealing. It's that you are to program by drag and dropping control statements and loops from a sidebar into a GUI frame. So it's difficult to manipulate. It's also maybe the only program that uses this language, so there is no really external tools to do that. So, well, I got some other issues with it, but enough about Emergent for now. After that, I tried Nest. It's more modular. Emergent is quite monolithic, and Nest is lighter. It's not a graphical program, but natively it uses SLI, which is a stack language. You know, like fourth, when you want to write 1 and 2, you write 1 to add, and you go to fetch the result on the top of the stack. So that's unusual. That's maybe a simple and effective design of language, but it's kind of slows down the adoption of these kind of programs. So someone probably noticed that, and they provided some Python bindings. They had a good idea of providing a Python overlay. Also, Nest is interesting because it lets you write your own neuron models, and it provides already more of them, even some compartmental models, simple ones with 2 or 3 compartments. Then back to the ancient behemoths category, we've got InYourOwn and Genesis. They are both quite flexible. They have parallel versions. They let you use models of neurons that are relatively complex, not abstracted into a single point, but like compartmental, it's like kind of 3D models somehow. A little bit more developed than point neurons, and you can write your own. And but it's the same story. If you wish, Neuron uses its own language, and with Genesis we meet again our stack language. But both of them, they provide Python bindings. Then finally, I'll present you a newcomer. It's called Topography. I mean, it's a newcomer compared to the PDP++, InYourOwn Genius. All these are from the 80s and still actively developed, but this one is from the early 2000s. Topographica, it focuses on the concept of neural maps, and I mean, this is a central object of Topographica, which is reasonable, and it works well. It implements learning algorithms from the thesis of its author, and these learning algorithms, they are very good at efficiently reproducing the learning process of the visual cortex, which is in the back of your head. When you receive information when you are young, your neurons will organize in a way that they will recognize shapes, for instance, and this is pretty good at simulating that. And so it's written in Python, but interestingly, it asks you to run your scripts through its own interpreter. Well, I didn't look into the internals, whether you can easily tweak that and remove that restriction, but I think the author may have plans anyway to do that by himself because it doesn't make much sense. And so if you are interested particularly in the visual system, which is one of the most well-known system of the brain, then you have to look into this program. It's a nice program. Okay, so that should give you a rough idea of the state of the art. The things to notice are that simulators, which are legacy simulators, they use legacy languages. So then they tend to overcome that either the wrong way or the right way. So the wrong way is when they try to impose a weird language. It chokes me, and it slows the adoption. And we quickly notice some variant of Greenspan's 10th rule. Just replace common list here by Python, and or I'll show you something about it later. So the right way to overcome an outdated domain-specific language barrier is to provide Python bindings, like many of them do. So the second issue of these simulators is the lock-in in which they are and in which they put their users, because when you have a program written in SLI, you're not going to be able to run it anywhere else. Same in C superscript. Also, the libraries that they have to reinvent the wheel regularly because they have to write their own libraries. And then the setup of many of these programs, as a result, it's quite clunky. Not difficult to reproduce experiments published by others. So yeah, about Greenspan's 10th rule. You think that may think that I was figurative, but actually you can read this snippet of text. It's from the latest release of Emergent. So they are implementing list comprehension, the for each loop, slicing, and they're advertising that it's like Python. It's not bad. So of course there are efforts to overcome all these issues. So we saw first that many simulators try to give some Python bindings. And second, to reduce lock-in, there are common data formats that are being developed. But still, the Python's API are very different between two simulators, even at the same level of modeling. They each decide about their own API without consulting each other. So that's where Neural Ensemble comes. It helps to unify the landscape. It's a set of tools. It's a set of tools. It's mostly Python libraries. It's almost entirely Python. It abstracts away the simulator. It converts the data. Converts the data from one format to another, and it unifies data analysis also, and it's like SciPy but for brain research. So Neural Ensemble, it's more than just tools for computational neuroscience. It's also tools for neuroscientists themselves when they have to store and process their data, which is in some weird format. They have also tools for that there. So there are tools to manage electrophysiological recordings, OpenElectrophy or NEO. There are tools to manage projects, in general, projects in neuroscience. And there are tools for simulation, like Brian, it's their own simulator, or Pine. So Pine is interesting. Pine, I'm going to talk about Pine, is an abstraction layer for a variety of neural simulators. So here's a minimal example of a simulation using Pine. So you can notice that, oh, no, you can't notice, yeah, no, you can. You can notice that choosing a simulator is just a matter of importing Pine.the simulator name. So if you want to know about Neural Ensemble, it's on neuralensemble.org just. So, oh, my mouse is laggy, it's horrible. Okay. Oh, and that's why it's failing. Okay. So a setup function. Then there is a setup function. It's a very simple example, but it shows you how it works in general. The setup function is used to set up some general parameters of the simulator. Here the time resolution. After that, well, no, I wanted to say yes. So there is a common set of parameters that can be set through Pine, but your simulator may have different set of parameters, some very specific things that are only present in Nest, Neuron, or something, or Brian. So you can still access, of course, the underlying simulator and change something that you can't change through Pine. Here I'm changing a few electrical properties of the membrane of neurons. So the threshold at which an action potential, so electrical signal is generated, where because it's all about electrical signaling between neurons and chemical also, but about electrical changes. The difference of potential between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell. So at rest, I change it from the default to minus 67, and at reset, so it's after an action potential, I say it comes back to minus 70. That's just an example of something, random example of some things that we can do through Pine. And if you want to change some simulator, or you have written your own neuron model and you want to change specific things, you can just access the underlying simulator directly. Just, of course, your model will not be very portable. If you then import something else, you will have to adapt your code. But it's still a minimal set of changes that you have to do as compared to rewriting your program in a different language or with a different API. So then I set up just two populations of neurons. Here there are two neurons in this one. These are point neurons, and I give these neurons these cell parameters. And the second population, which is actually not a neuron but a special class to generate signals, that will input the signals in this neuron, and it will input them at these times that I specify here. And of course I need to connect these two populations, all neurons to all neurons, so this one connected to both of them, and I set the weights, which I'm not delving into, but it's just that there is no resistance somehow between these two things. Then I say to Pine to record both things, again this thing to me, and I run it for 50 time units. Okay, so now I'll come with what I've done, because Pine allows setting the network structure and running the underlying simulator, but it doesn't allow learning, and at some level in computational cognitive neuroscience you will have to have learning. Your networks have to learn stuff in the same way as your brain has to learn stuff. So that's why I'm making PyCon. It's a learning framework for Pine. So it lets you define your own Pine network. It doesn't interfere with that. And then it provides function for learning. Here the beginning is very similar. I omit some import and some setup function, but the beginning is very similar to the previous examples. We just set up two populations, we connect them, but then I start PyCon visualization, and I schedule a network training, self-organized network training. And well, at least this is how I would like it to look, but currently the network training is not finished. Okay, do we have enough time to show some code? How much time do we have left? Like?
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
25 minutes only.
Okay, so I think I will do that, hoping it doesn't fail. All right. All right. So yeah, that's a quite messy file. It's just my sandbox file actually that I use to try out stuff, but and my mouse also doesn't work here. So here I import, as you see I'm importing pine.brian, so I'm using the Brian simulator. I could just replace that by Nest, and I would be using Nest because I have both installed on this machine. Then I'll skip on some uninteresting things. I'm importing. This is a PyConMo's visualization, and this is still part of visualization. So I'm going to just show how I've done some stuff. I'm starting a separate process for the visualization. So it starts. It's using the multiprocessing library of Python, and the main simulation process will regularly communicate updates about the activity of the network to this child process. All right. Here there is the setup of the population in a similar way as in the examples. We just make some projection. It's pretty random. It's not meant to do anything significant, but just to try out some stuff. So and there is some code which doesn't pertain to anything also, but. Here we've got the building of some structure that I send, that what I want to display then, that I send to this child process that I created. So this is some code that I used to build this structure. And so I want to display population 1 and population 2 and the connection between them. And then I send this structure to the child process, and from time to time I send it an update of the running simulation. Okay, so let's see what it does. What did it do? Okay, will it work? Yeah, so these are just warnings from some libraries that I'm using. Okay. All right. Do we see something? Yeah. Okay. We see some units which became red. These are just the units which are active, and the ones which are still white are the ones which are inactive, because I just connected the input source, the current source, to a random subset of 50 units, on other 100 of them, So we just see that it will not change because it's just a constant current which is applied throughout the whole simulation, which is applied to this. It doesn't look like much, but it was just a proof of concept actually. So the kind of demo that you just see is actually just it's actually on GitHub, so you can run it because it's my kind of file in which I try out some things. I was trying out lastly the visualization function, and the goal was to see if the multiprocessing module is actually a good way to set up of concurrent rendering and simulation. The answer is that I have no clue if it's actually the best way to do that, but it works. So then I just need to go on programming something that will look good. I also didn't show learning because there is nothing really visually appealing to this, and also I didn't finish the code for learning, self-organized learning of networks. But if you want to contribute, please just send me pull requests. It will feel less lonely there on GitHub. So it's the priority is that I will first finish the learning algorithm. This is the reason why I made PyCon, and that maybe later I will improve visualization. Visualization is just some sort of gadget actually, and I also need to finish my PhD, so no sleep for me with all these things. Okay. Okay, this will be my last slide. I wanted to conclude from a high altitude again. In science, sharing is caring, and ensuring that your work is reproducible and reproducible with the least effort is not just a matter of good manners, but it's actually a foundation of science. So So I don't care, for instance, if you only know MATLAB. You should understand that in addition of being an obsolete language, the code is closed, and the licenses cost money. So you should at least make the effort of looking into free alternatives, whether free as in freedom also, and so I'm promoting Python as an alternative because it's easy to learn, it's powerful, it has a lot of libraries, and it's easy to document stuff. And so as a consequence, it's easy to obtain documentation as well. And I just learned Python like last autumn, and I didn't have any difficulties to move on in Python and learn how to produce what I want in a short amount of time alone. So I think that Python is a very good candidate for a unified language of science, at least of computational neuroscience. And I think other people also think that because they are because all these simulators are starting to have good Python bindings. All right, so these are my advisors. I have very dispatched advisors geographically. Thank you, advisors. And I'd like to thank my wife also. She's lovely and very smart, and she supports me every day. And thank you for attending. I'd be happy to answer any question and show some implementation if you are interested.
Yeah, as a question, you were speaking a little bit about learning algorithms, and I was wondering what kind of approach you are using. So, or do you want to try to use some, let's say, evolutionary algorithms to do that stuff? Because, well, I'm actually interested in this topic itself. Actually, I want to do my master thesis in this area, and the actual process how the brain directly learns is still not understood. Therefore, I mean, you mentioned that the process in a computer, how a computer learns, and the brain well, deals with learning may be somewhat similar, which I'm not really sure of, or may even object a little bit, and therefore I would be interested in your approach for well, creating, let's say, a framework for learning within the frameworks you already showed to us.
Yeah, good question. So there are algorithms which are biologically unrealistic, and there are algorithms which are good candidates to model how it actually happens in the brain. But of course, when you do a model, you need to keep in mind that you are simplifying a lot of things. So even when you look at Hebbian learning, in short, it's that neurons that fire together, they wire together. This is also very simplified. But still, what we have to look at is how the result of the learning algorithm looks like. So for instance, in this Topographica, there is James Bednar, the author, who uses a LISM algorithm to develop his topographic maps. The output, I mean the result of learning with this algorithm on natural scenes or on blobs is topographic maps of the visual cortex, which are extremely similar to how we know the visual cortex of monkeys and humans is organized. So with a patchy appearance. I mean, never mind. It's the output of the algorithm that may count more. If you are interested in how the brain develops, it's going to be much more difficult. You can look at how the activation of how the information is processed on a short time scale in the brain, and you can look at how the brain develops over several years. That's completely different questions, And the learning algorithms that I want to implement here, they are aimed at the first problem. So I try to make them similar to what the brain does, so biologically plausible, but if there is some more information of how I could improve them, it's good. If there is no information, I'm going to do something that looks okay. And then I'm interested in if the end result is realistic, and then I'm interested more into looking how the resulting network processes information on a short time scale. So yeah, learning is you have different ways of looking at it. If you're studying learning itself, then you should first study developmental biology. Actually, you should work in biology and tell us how it's actually developed, because there is not much information on the development of from before birth up to. Yeah, it's quite hard to do. But this book, this computational exploration in cognitive neuroscience that I advertised, it's explaining how the authors are explaining how they came up with a learning algorithm that is relatively okay, biologically plausible, and it gives good results. I mean, it's quite convincing, the explanations. They make the link between each step of the algorithm and a biological mechanism. That's the idea, I think. I'm trying to implement the algorithm there in the first place. Other questions?
Me?
Yeah.
So you mentioned most of the, or also you showed it's mostly simulation at the point neurons, more or less?
Yeah, because I don't have enough.
Yeah, so I'm more interested into the transition from point neurons to actually like column, like cortical organization, neural, and
yeah.
from cortical organization to area organization.
So, but
which of this list should I be looking first? So basically, the level of abstraction goes.
All right.
up.
Yeah, you want to use
So I don't want to think about my how to say threshold potential, something like this, right?
Okay, that's bad. But there are model. I mean, some people are using point neurons to model cortical mini columns, but that's very rough approximations. I don't know if there are better models of cortical mini columns without dealing with neurons.
Well, but if you don't want to simulate, as you said, 100 billions of them, you have to abstract away some of the details.
Well,
we don't even know which ones are important or not.
No, but you don't try to simulate the whole brain. I mean, when you can say, yeah, well, okay, you're right. These point neurons, they are used. They're used in a I wouldn't say in the wrong way, because they give the right results. But if you want to simulate a cortical mini column, you are going to take a small group of neurons, very small, and you are going to apply your learning algorithm to it with inhibition, which is distributed in the same way as if it was a real mini column. So kind of this is a group of neurons with its own inhibitory function, or own inhibitory network, and you are going to maybe for the whole map have a second level of inhibition, and you are going to assume that this extremely scaled down simulation is a good model of what happens when there are a million times more neurons. So yeah, if you want to do full mini column simulation, is going to be very expensive computationally. So, but typically what happens is that we simulate mini columns by scaling down scaling down the problem. There are probably better ways, but that's not what's happening. Yeah.
So I have very little interest in biological neural networks.
Yes.
But it is a structure for a problem that I'm planning on working on.
Yeah.
Which one allows most abstract neural network structures that you can come up with.
But it's for engineering.
Something like that.
Oh, that's not what so then there are other things. Let me think, actually. I don't really remember.
But I can talk with you about it later.
Yeah, but because, I mean, it's different programs. That's really not efficient for engineering purposes.
Okay.
There are algorithms and libraries which are done to process your data and learn it fast without dealing with action potentials and various things like that. Yeah, machine learning. Because what I was talking about, when I was saying that maybe you remember from your university course, your artificial neural networks class, this is what they teach there. Not about, they don't teach about this. They teach about the other kind that you're interested in, the engineering kind. Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah. I know.
I think anyway it's 12 almost, so we're done. Thank you. Oh, also, if you have feedback about my presentation, you can give. It's the first time I'm giving this talk, so I don't know how it was. Thank you.